Hi everyone, welcome back to Stefan Livera podcast, brought to you by swan.com, the best place to buy Bitcoin. Joining me today is Skot, and he is known for his work on BitAxe, and we're going to talk a bit about Bitcoin mining and open source, and I think this is a really interesting project. So first of all, Skot, welcome to the show.
Hey, Stefan, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. This is like one of the most amazing, like legendary high signal podcasts. So it's cool to like be a part of that.
Oh, hey, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I've seen you've been doing some really interesting stuff. And I thought, listeners need to hear about it. So do you want to just, take a minute, give us a bit of your background? I know you've been around Bitcoin mining for a little while.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. I'm an electrical engineer that's what I went to school for. Been messing around with electronics for quite a while now, but only in the last couple of years getting into Bitcoin mining. So, this is like, it's a hobby that has turned into a profession now, which is pretty dang exciting. I get to wake up every day and do this. But I guess I want to talk a little bit maybe about like the idea of the permissionless Bitcoin and coming at that from like a hardware point of view. So I was thinking about this morning, kind of an interesting story. When I was in high school, I was in kind of a smallish town. There was, a couple radio stations, and they're terrible. They never played the music my friends and I wanted to hear. So, like you can imagine. And so I somehow, went down this rabbit hole on the very like early internet and learned that there was these guys, and they were publishing plans for making your own FM radio transmitters. And it was, it was open source, and it was just out there. And some friends of mine, a good friend of mine and I, we got those plans, and we built our own radio station, like from scratch, like also kind of learning how electronics work at the same time. And it was amazing, right? It's not illegal to have your own low power FM transmitter. And so that's where we started, and just kind of like broadcast maybe like on the block kind of thing. But, kind of digging into it more and more and realizing that the FCC in the United States is not very friendly to people who want to, take advantage of this public resource, which is the airwaves, and kind of meeting up with other people who are doing really interesting things in that space, and just got really excited about this idea that I could like make electronics and, have like an empowering sort of thing to do with them, which at the time was music. And we had a community that was sprung up around that, which was just really exciting. So I don't know, fast forward like several years, and I was just like kind of brought back to that really amazing time with this BitAxe project. Is like, there's no one doing small home miners in an open source way. And I don't really know how to do it, but I can just dive in and no one can stop me. So that's I guess a brief backstory on how.
Yeah, sure.
How
and so, you were
got
mentioning, it does tie into some of the ethos aspects of Bitcoin, this idea of a decentralized system, this idea of you can run your own Bitcoin node and all these things. Of course, there have been some criticisms and aspects that, deserve some criticism in Bitcoin mining nowadays around, people say, as an example, there's not that many competitive Bitcoin mining hardware manufacturers. There is a little bit of centralization at the mining pool level. So these are things that, we as Bitcoiners, if we care about decentralization, we have to sort of, take that concern seriously. And, I guess what you're trying to focus on here is mainly I presume it's mainly at the manufacturer level, but also it has implications elsewhere in terms of how you set up this BitAxe and how you point it to a particular mining pool and actually contribute hash rate to the network.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting when you think back, when Bitcoin started, right? The early days, when Satoshi started it, there obviously wasn't many Bitcoin miners, and it was just people using CPUs to do it. It kind of got into GPUs and then a little bit into FPGAs. That's when I first started hearing about it right in there. But it wasn't a very commercial endeavor. There was just people kind of doing it. They were sharing designs amongst one another for software and how to configure their GPUs and FPGAs. Sorry, it was a lot more open. You can see a lot of this stuff if you go on Bitcoin Talk and look at the people that were discussing this, way back in the day. And that was sort of when I first heard about it and kind of got involved. And I set up an FPGA to mine Bitcoin on my own. And it was, it was fun to dig into it because it was totally, it was open source. It was just out there. Like anyone could just grab it and start messing with it. But I think we saw a change when ASICs came around because those are incredibly expensive to build. A lot of companies had to invest significant resources to get that off the ground. And we kind of saw Bitcoin mining move away from the plebs, from people who are just interested in doing this, towards like, this is a profitable business. That's what we're mostly focused on, is profit. It makes sense. There's, a lot of profit to be made potentially, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, especially not anymore. Like, it's a pretty mature market. There have been lots of companies making ASICs. There's 2 major ones right now, but they're on, I don't know, like their 10th revision. So it's mature, and there are options now for people who are just interested in doing this to do it. And that's kind of what I wanted to do with the BitAxe, was allow people to mess around with it. People like myself who are interested in electronics, people who are just interested in Bitcoin, who've heard about Bitcoin mining, want to try it. And open it back up, and that sort of initial ethos of, it's permissionless, the information's out there, do with it what you can.
Yeah, so as you were saying, I think there is and I don't want to criticize too hard, but there is an element of, let's say, mercenary kind of aspect, like what you'll find in certain elements of the industry, but at the same time, you can't, it's like they're trying to be profitable entrepreneur. So at the same time, you sort of can't fault them too much. But at the same time, there is sometimes a bit more of a closed ecosystem there. Whereas, let's say the ideal in the Bitcoin world is that it's open source, and maybe that's where, as I understand, some of your critique is as well. Do you want to just explain a little bit of how you see that around, the way some of the hardware is not necessarily open, or some of the firmware is not necessarily open? Do you want to just elaborate on that?
Right now, besides the BitAxe, which is still small, there's no open source Bitcoin mining hardware, firmware, or otherwise. We had briefly back in the day, we had open source firmware for the ant miners from Brains. They discontinued that a couple of years ago. There's just nothing. Bitcoin mining, or Bitcoin itself, is intrinsically open source, right? Satoshi said early on, I've developed an open source money. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And if it weren't...
Sorry, just on that, would you mind explaining why, in your view, why is it that way? Is it just that it's gotten that competitive? Is there some special dynamic? Is it just that the costs involved? Do you have any idea why?
Why has it gone closed source?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it started off because ASIC development, like the chips, is so capitally intensive, right? Tens of millions of dollars, years, huge teams, lots of risk associated for the companies doing this, and they just don't feel very inclined to share when, they're putting up that much money. And that happens. We've seen this in the PC industry, where sort of the initial trailblazers are taking a lot of risk and maybe don't share as much. But as things mature and as it becomes a little bit more commonplace, maybe more entrants in the market, then it makes more sense for these things to open up. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that it's closed because of just the immense costs associated with ASIC development. And I mean, another interesting side effect of that is that these companies making ASICs and are they're laser focused on one target audience for their miners. I think they have to be in order to make their business case work out. But that audience that they're laser focused on is the the large industrial miners. For your viewers watching, I've got some of these big miners behind me. They're loud, they're hot, they're purpose built for running in an industrial data center. And that, with a couple small exceptions, that is all it is made now, is industrial miners, right? They're not for you, they're not for me, they are for large data centers.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there are some of the trade-offs that come with that, right? We're talking about machines that give out a lot more heat. These are machines that are a lot louder. These are machines that maybe the electricity, it's not, your house is not rigged up for that, right? So you need special equipment or special, electrical to deal with it. And then the cost as well can really vary. Of course, that can wax and wane along with Bitcoin bull and bear markets, but that can also put it out of range, let's say, of the everyday hodler, let's say.
Yeah.
So
I would argue fully out of range. Like, you're talking thousands of dollars for the latest machine, and if you're in North America, you can't plug it in. In other places in the world, you're probably not going to have a high enough current circuit to plug it in. Not to mention the heat and the noise that you have to deal with.
Yeah, so it's like we've now some of it, at least in terms of manufacturers, we're starting to see, as an example, Block is coming out and they're saying we're going to do a mining machine, and they're looking to do 3 nanometer, and they're a very big company who can afford this kind of cost, and it's this is like a multi-year project. I know there were others, like Intel said they were going to do one, but then I think they backed off on that idea. I know there are other new or other competitors as well, like BitDeer and others, who are going to talk about this kind of thing. But it seems that the number of open source ones is limited.
There's non-existent right now. Block seems to be signaling that their whole device as well as their ASIC is going to be open source. I'm not exactly sure what the plan is there, but I think we'll find out when it comes out. I've been talking with those guys a lot. Several people at Block have reached out that they are fans of the BitAxe project. I think we kind of align there. So I fully intend to use their open source ASIC to make a BitAxe type home miner when it's ready. But Jack Dorsey has been described to me as having very deep pockets and a very low time preference, and committed towards Bitcoin, and specifically Bitcoin mining. And this is fantastic. This is what it takes to sort of spearhead this whole industry, which I think is incredibly important. So very grateful for that. So
do you want to now go to BitAxe and give us a bit of an overview? What is the BitAxe? What was I guess it's kind of clear that what your goal was to make an open source Bitcoin miner, but if you could just explain.
Well, actually, my initial goal wasn't to make like an open source home miner. I've been messing around with electronics for a long time, got into Bitcoin, and was like, oh my gosh, electronics and Bitcoin, two great tastes. I want to play around with this. And so I literally just went searching for open source designs for ASICs and found absolutely nothing. So I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to start from scratch. So I got myself an S9 and started work on reverse engineering it, because there's very, very little documentation out there. It's not meant to use the chips on their own for anything. So I got work reverse engineering it, just poking at it, oscilloscopes, logic analyzer, figuring out how it works. Actually, also figuring out more in depth how Bitcoin mining works for myself. And then the S17 chip came along, and that started to become affordable. And it was actually, the chip itself was available on the repair market for people who are repairing these things. So I could, from China, order like a couple bare chips, carefully measured the chip, made my own data sheet essentially for the chip by measuring it, trying to back out what the pin connections are for this chip based on looking at the Antminer. And basically put together a rough, we call it a breakout board. It's like just the pins that come out, and you try and hook it to a computer or something else to try and figure out how it works.
So, just to be clear, I guess, is this kind of, you're trying to reverse engineer the boards? Is that kind of what you're doing, or not really?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's no other option, right? There's no. A lot of times, electronic parts on the market have data sheets where they clearly explain, what voltage goes here, what these pins do, like what the mechanical parameters are. There's nothing like that for these chips. They are not available anywhere on the open market. They're only for Antminers. So yes, reverse engineering it is essential. And to be clear, I'm not the only person doing this. Right? When you think about third-party firmware for Antminers like Brains, Luxor, Epic, there's several of them. These people all reverse engineered the chips and the protocol as well because they have to make their own firmware to communicate with it. So I kind of did what they did. I just went a little bit different direction where instead of making a commercial firmware to run on Antminers, I take one chip out of an S19, for example. An S19 has like 320 chips on it. I take one of those chips out and have it on my own circuit board that has its own power supply and can operate independently of the rest of the Antminer circuitry.
Interesting. And that's actually interesting. I know this is like a common misconception. People call it an ASIC, right? The whole thing. But actually what you're referring to is actually those 320 chips.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And it's not like a Bitcoin term, ASIC. It's an electronics industry term. It stands for application-specific integrated circuit. And it does refer to the chip. In this case, the application that it's specific to is Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, it's
and the integrated circuit is just a miniaturized circuit. So yeah, when certain people are talking about ASICs, they're referring to the chips, but it has come to mean sort of the whole machine.
Yeah, okay. And so I guess, obvious upfront questions that most people will have is they'll say, well, is this efficient? Is the everyday person just going to mine at a loss? If you could explain a little bit of your thoughts on this idea as to, why should a person do this? Is it only for the hobbyist or maybe ideological reasons, like you care about the decentralization of the network, or is it, can you actually be a profitable miner doing this?
Sure. So the chips that we're using, the latest BitAxe, which is our sort of third major revision, uses the chip out of the S21. That was just announced or just started shipping in January from Bitmain. So we have that exact same chip. So we have the exact same efficiency as an S21. That's like 17.5 watts per terahash. So we get that same efficiency. Now we have a dramatically lower total hash rate than an S21 because we have 1/324th of the chips. So we're at the max hash rate that a single chip can do, which happens to be about 3/4 of a terahash, 750 gigahash. So the upside there is that, I've got one running on the desk right next to me and you can't hear it because it uses 12 watts, like the same as a cell phone charger. You're never going to ever notice this on your power bill because you probably don't notice cell phone chargers plugged in on your power bill. It's not hot. It's not loud. You can basically plug it in and forget about it if you want. It also has a little screen on it so you can see if you're lottery mining, like how close you got to solving a block. But to answer your question, and a lot of people ask me this question, is it profitable? Unlikely. It's extremely unlikely given the residential setting that you're going to make any serious Bitcoin. But we haven't changed the efficiency here. We're still dealing with the same efficiency as every miner. So you didn't pay very much for this. You have a tiny hash rate, so therefore you don't get any significant rewards, right? If we had changed anything there, then we would be onto something and could probably revolutionize the market. But it's important to remember in the sort of residential setting, you probably couldn't be profitable on any miner that you have. You could get a bunch of S19s and put them in your basement, but if you're paying 10, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, you're just not going to be profitable. Not to mention all the other infrastructure things you have to set up to run those miners.
Okay. So then why would people do it?
There's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons, and I'm still finding out what they are, which is pretty cool. I think a lot of people are interested in Bitcoin. Like they're genuinely interested in Bitcoin, and they have heard about Bitcoin mining, or they're interested in trying Bitcoin mining, and they want to do it at home and they want to play with it. That's the BitAxe is a very low barrier to entry towards trying out Bitcoin mining. And the success of this project so far, which has been kind of blowing my mind, is showing that there's a significant, or at least a apparently significant group of people that are interested in doing this. So there's just that pure curiosity aspect, like I want to try Bitcoin mining. Like, there's other products on the market where you can try this too. There's Gecko Science USB sticks that you can get. There's FutureBit makes the Apollo and the Apollo 2, which are bigger home miners that also have a node in them. So you can get those things. I would say that they kind of are in different target audiences. Like the Apollo's, near $1,000, so it's a little bit more of a commitment to get started, and the Gecko Science sticks require a little bit more technical know-how to run. So there's that. I think that market is bigger than I had ever imagined, but this isn't like change the world size hash rate. And I think that there's an interesting power, I think, that this home mining has, where you can just get this thing, and the lower the cost we can get it, the better. So it's not going to break the bank. You can get it, you can plug it in, and you can forget about it. And it doesn't have any additional costs, right? You just plug it in. And if enough people do that, then it does play a significant role in decentralizing the hash rate and securing the censorship resistance that Bitcoin is so famous for. And I think there's a growing number of people that are interested in doing that. They're like, yeah, I'll plug in this, $150 thing, maybe $50 someday thing to play to help out Bitcoin and to see if I can protect this very powerful thing that we have in Bitcoin.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the ColdCard Mark IV and the new ColdCard Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This show also brought to you by mempool.space, the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. I use it all the time when I'm checking transaction fees and trying to understand what is the state of Bitcoin's mempool. You can search transactions, historical as well as unconfirmed ones, and also see a great way to visualize things across the Lightning Network, Liquid, mining, and so much more. Also, for those of you with an enterprise, they offer a mempool.space enterprise program. So for those of you as part of that enterprise program, you might want to get increased API limits, and you might want to have increased access to the team in terms of feature requests. You might want to have special branding in terms of how your custom instance of mempool.space looks. So to sign up for that, go to mempool.space/enterprise. And now, back to the show. Great. And so could you just, for people to give them an idea, what does it look like to actually set one up? Like, what are kind of the steps? Like, let's say you are able to order one, or if you're really into it, you make one. How do you actually set it up? How do you kind of point it to a pool and actually do the mining with it?
Sure. Yeah. I just have one third reason why people might want to run this that we should talk about real quickly, if you don't mind. The other aspect is lottery mining, which it means you are running it solo. You're solo mining, and there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. But solo mining means you're not a part of a pool, and so you are mining with the very remote chance that you will win the full block reward. Meaning, that's over $100,000, depending on the Bitcoin price. But I was actually looking at the odds in the California State Lottery. They have like Powerball, and they draw like 5 balls. And the odds of you getting, I think it's 4 out of 5 balls and collecting that like 4 out of 5 prize is like 8 million or so, which is not good odds. But that's also your chances of solving a block with a BitAxe every day. So if you run it for a whole day, you have like a 1 in 8 million-ish chance of solving a block. And it also happens that the prize money is about the same, of course, depending on which halving we're in, but the price of Bitcoin. But it's similar. It's in a similar ballpark. So there's a lot of people that play the lottery. A lot of people that play the lottery, and this also kind of feeds into that ability. And the cool thing is, you just leave it plugged in, and you're essentially buying a lottery ticket every day.
That's pretty cool in a way. I mean, it could be, maybe some entrepreneur listening now is like, hey, I could brand this, and actually sell it as like a lottery miner product and kind of sell it like that. And I mean, who knows, right? Maybe if they make it really easy for the user to do that, I mean, it could be funny.
That's what we intend to do, is make it really easy to do. And maybe that is a good segue into how you set the question about how to
so
set
let's
this
talk
up.
about what does it look like when you actually set one up?
Sure. So you can all the design files for the BitAxe are open source. You can go to my website, bitaxe.org, and I've got it all on there. So if you are technical, maybe you've done some electronic soldering before, you can download it all. You can get your circuit boards made in China for actually very little money. You can order your parts off the internet. We have the full list of everything you need to order. I actually have a how-to document on there of like tools that you need to buy to actually solder this together. And lots of people have done that. It's pretty cool. Even some people that have never soldered anything together before, they have built themselves a BitAxe. And that's pretty rad. That's like very, self-sovereign mining, is you're like, I built this thing from scratch, right? Just try and stop me. That's a subset of people that are willing to take on that big project. So if you're not into that, you can also go to bitaxe.org, and I have a thing called the legit list. And I have probably over a dozen sellers on there at this point. And these are sellers that respect the open source license, meaning they give credit back to the project, they haven't modified it, etc. There's just like a short list of rules. But I have a dozen sellers on there. You can go there. You can find one that's in your country. We have them all around North America, Europe, Australia, China. And so you can go there, find one, check out the prices, see what works for you, and just buy one. And so from these sellers, you will get a BitAxe in the mail. It's totally assembled in the box with a power supply, so it's totally ready to go. I can actually got one right here for people that are watching. Like, this thing is not big. I'd say
it's kind of like Raspberry Pi size,
Yeah, exactly. It's like Raspberry Pi size. It's got a fan on the top and a heat sink and a little display, and it's a bare circuit board. Some of the sellers will sell you a stand. Like, this is a cool little stand, so you can put it on your desk. Some people sell it in like an enclosure, so you don't have to look at the circuit board if you're not into that. But that's what you'll get. Depending on your region, you'll get an appropriate power supply that is compatible with your outlet. And it's, this is like standard wall outlet thing, like cell phone charger. So you can plug it in anywhere. You'll plug it in, and the first step is to get the BitAxe onto your Wi-Fi network. It only operates on Wi-Fi. You can't do Ethernet like a lot of the bigger miners. We kind of just made that decision because it's easy. Everyone's got Wi-Fi. On the screen, it will show you a Wi-Fi network to join. So you take your cell phone or your computer or whatever, and you join that Wi-Fi network that's actually created by the BitAxe. And in most cases, this seems to be somewhat of a standard, especially on mobile products, is a screen will pop up immediately as soon as you join that Wi-Fi network. And the purpose of this screen is to then type in your Wi-Fi credentials for your home network.
Gotcha.
Into
so
the BitAxe.
it can connect to your Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
So
similar
it can
to like
connect
the
your-
block clock and stuff. Yeah.
It's a really common paradigm in like IoT products. So if you've set up a block clock or I don't know, like a Wi-Fi doorbell or a light or anything, this will be very familiar for you. Type in your Wi-Fi network name, password. You can actually, at that point, you can configure it with the Stratum pool that you want to use and your username and password and some other operating parameters, or you can just do that later. But the point is you hit save and it will then restart and join your network. And it actually is configured with default, so it can start mining right then if you want. But the prudent thing to do is to then, it will show you an IP address on the screen, which you can type into your browser once you're back on your network. And that will pull up the full BitAxe dashboard. We call it AxeOS, and it will show you all your mining stats. If you've ever logged into an Antminer dashboard, it's very similar. On there, you can see how well you're doing, what your best difficulty is, all the temperature, fan speed, all that good stuff. And you can configure your Stratum information. We use just vanilla Stratum V1. So you can connect to any pool that you want. All the pools support Stratum. And so you can type in any of them that you want. And that's it. You're kind of off and running. It'll just keep on doing that forever. And it has a little display on the front. So you don't always have to connect to the dashboard to see what's going on with it.
Yeah, that's cool.
Simple.
And so then, so then you're away, and so then you can lottery mine, or you can point it to, a pool. Hopefully, a pool that's not one of the proxy pools. Let's say, but we'll get into that maybe later. But So in terms of the overall, intent with you're running this BitAxe project. I presume there are other contributors as well. But is the idea that you're going to is there a commercial intent that you're going to make this into a commercial project, or is it just going to be sort of this, is it a not-for-profit project? Like, what's your intent, or how are you going to keep it sustainable as well?
So I have been extremely fortunate. I was awarded an OpenSats grant at the beginning of this year. The OpenSats team was amazing, and I think they instantly recognized that this open source project is fantastic. And so, I got a grant to work on this. It worked out that I was able to quit my full-time job and move to working on the BitAxe. So I've got, a year under this grant to do everything that I can to get the BitAxe and follow-on projects up and running. So it's sustainable for now, having me just, publishing everything open source. There's a number of other people that, like sellers and actually manufacturers, that have spun up their own businesses surrounding this. So I don't manufacture any of them myself. Like, I've built a couple by hand on my desk for testing and R&D, but I don't manufacture any of the ones for sale. So that's all handled by other people that are for-profit enterprises. And that seems to be going really well for them. I mean, at least right now, BitAxes are selling like crazy. So manufacturers, I think, are doing really well, which is awesome. But as far as the future, there's so many interesting options to work on. The BitAxe just has one chip. It's really low hash rate. I think, and we've got the plans out there. If you go and look, there's a product that's almost done called the BitAxe Hex. That actually has 6 chips on it, and it should be 3 terahash. That's a little bit bigger, a little bit hotter, a little bit more expensive, but we're going to sort of put out a selection of different miners to go after people that have different goals for home mining. I think and then of course, going after different chips, different ASICs. I think I've been working with Block. We have a couple things going on there. I would really like to move to their ASIC, if that makes sense. And then there's a couple interesting follow-on projects that just sort of fell out of this that I think will be really beneficial for the community. One of them, which is kind of cool, is a replacement control board for Antminers. This would be fully open source. Just drop it into your Antminer. It would have custom firmware on it, and it would be the first of its kind. But this is something, because we've already reverse engineered these chips, we did what a lot of the other control board makers and firmware makers have done already. So it's not a stretch to make our own control board. In fact, I've got a prototype of one right here. So that's coming. That's kind of a side project, but I think that would be pretty useful, especially for people that are trying to use these Antminers in different situations, like heat reuse or stranded energy. They are, in my opinion, suffering under this firmware that's just not meant for their application. So I'm hoping that putting this out there can enable some of these cool new applications.
Interesting. And so that could mean, from a sovereignty perspective of owning or kind of controlling what the machine does, maybe in other cases it's like a overclocking or underclocking use, perhaps. Yeah,
exactly. And there's a cool pleb miner, like heat punks movement of a bunch of people that are doing really neat stuff. They're heating their house, they're heating their like marijuana grow operation or their greenhouse. They're doing all kinds of stuff. And so having the actual control board hardware that you can modify, I think, opens up a lot of different options. Like you could attach a thermostat to it. You could put a touch screen on it. You could have it work on Wi-Fi, right? Like it's such a bummer to get in my opinion, to get a space heater and then have to plug it in via Ethernet. So this kind of opens up, I think, some cool options there. And this is just sort of a side thing from what we've discovered from the BitAxe project. And I've been saying we a lot. I'm just the instigator now of this project. It has grown. We have a group called the Open Source Miners United that has grown to 2,500 members, and lots of smart people have joined, including early on some people who joined who were instrumental in getting the BitAxe to where it is today. So I'm using we a lot now because this is a group effort.
Awesome. And so the idea, you were mentioning that there might be different chips or rather different forms of the BitAxe that come with maybe more chips. So in your idea, is your idea that there might be people who just want to kind of run one and they just get like the smallest version, and there are others who might otherwise want to run multiple of these, and so that's for them, that's where you get the 6-chip version, or what's the idea there?
Today, this guy posted a picture. He's got I think 19 BitAxes. They're mounted on his wall in his house.
Right.
And he's just got this whole farm of them going. So some people are really, really into it. It starts to make a lot less sense practically to have 19 BitAxes when you could have a bigger machine that has a few more chips, and you could just run that. So and then there's people who are like, well, the BitAxe is great, it's nice and quiet, but we could double it, or we could 6x it, and it still wouldn't break the bank or be too hot. So we want to have options for those people. And there's the way that these chips are set up on the hashboard is they're all actually connected in serial, like both power and data, like chained together. And so I was very interested in uncovering reverse engineering how that works, because on the BitAxe we just have one, so it's the only one in the chain. It's a lot easier. But kind of unlocking this design of these multi-chip miners and how the chips are designed to be chained together was the goal with the BitAxe Hex. And of course, we're releasing that all out there. And This guy on Open Source Miners United, he's like, oh yeah, I know how to do this, and just jumped right in. He's got a 16 chip miner he's working on called the OXAxe, all publishing it open source. It uses like the heat sink and fans from like servers, like server computers. He's got it on there. It's super cool.
Yeah, fascinating. And so I guess coming back to why people would do this, right? It comes back to, as you were saying, the kind of hobby use, the low barrier to entry, the people who want to lottery mine. There's kind of those different use cases, let's say, or reasons to do it. And then I guess you were kind of touching on some of this before around the idea that what if you had 1 million people doing this? What if you had millions of people around the world doing this? Could you just elaborate on what would that mean, at least in proportion to the current network size?
If you 1 terahash, or 1 exahash is 1 million terahash. So for round numbers, if we had a 1 terahash BitAxe, which I think we're gonna have here pretty soon, that would be 1 million BitAxes to equal an exahash. And if you have 1 million BitAxes mining, they're solo mining, at current network difficulty, that means that one of those BitAxers would solve a block and get the full block reward every 4 days, which is kind of amazing. Like once we have someone, like one person a week solving a block and getting the full block reward, I think that sells the next million. But, I tell people an individual BitAxe is insignificant. You have no chance. But we're not just selling one. We're going to get lots of these out there because they're so cheap. There's such a low barrier to plugging one in and running it that we're going to get lots of these out there. And, if we have 5 million of them, let's see, what is it right now? We're at 553 exahash. I got my little dashboard on my desk here.
So, I mean, if you round up, that's like 1% of the network.
Yeah, we 5 million of them, that's 1% of the network. And it would be interesting, I think it will be very interesting to see what happens when we have, 1% or more miners on the network who don't care at all. They don't care what the hash price is, right? They're not going to unplug. They've probably forgotten about it. Like, what does that do to the market dynamics of mining when you have so many people that aren't doing this for a for-profit business? It's just inconsequential how much it costs them to run, or if they're losing money or making money. I think that changes the market dynamics a lot, and it'd be very interesting to see sort of what the rest of the network does in light of those competitors. And the other benefit to having these completely distributed, decentralized miners is that they're kind of like immune to regulation, right? It's like no one's going to notice if you're running one of these BitAxes in your house. It's very unlikely you're going to shut down. And adding more and more to the network requires zero infrastructure cost, which is actually a really big deal. In talking with some of the bigger miners, they're struggling to get these transformers that they need. They have incredibly large facilities. They have huge staffs of people. And all of that is on top of relatively thin mining profit margins. So it's a very interesting dynamic. I'm definitely excited to see what happens.
Back to the show in a moment. The lead sponsor of this show is Swan.com, and Swan has a mission to onboard millions of people into Bitcoin. I also work at Swan, helping on some educational content for the team. Now, the team have also put out a new version of the Swan Bitcoin application, which is available on your smartphone, whether it's Apple or Android. Now, this app has a really fast onboarding experience. It's now just a few minutes to go from zero to Bitcoin. So if you are standing there with your family or friends and you might have been having trouble trying to get them onboarded, well, try this now. Recommend Swan Bitcoin. And you can do this while you're standing next to them. They can click through, and most of them will be able to set up and do this in just a few minutes. Also, the team at Swan have rolled out a new promotion. There are 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys. So this is a great way to go from zero to Bitcoin and in a guided and managed way. So reminder, go to your App Store or Play Store and search Swan Bitcoin to get onboarded with Bitcoin today. This show also brought to you by Nomad Capitalist. Nomad Capitalist is a leading provider in terms of offshore tax and lifestyle strategy planning and implementation. They can help you go overseas and legally lower your taxes. As many of you know, I grew up in Australia, but I left. I was sick of it in terms of the taxes and the COVID tyranny and all these other things. And so that's why I left, and now I live in Dubai. But that's not necessarily the place for you. You have to think exactly what works for you, for your family, for your business. And Nomad Capitalists have worked across dozens of different countries. They've helped people get passports, residences, bank accounts, and all kinds of other things. And importantly, it's not just about choosing one place. It may be multiple places. And it may be also about making the pieces fit together in terms of how your business fits with your family and you as an individual. Nomad Capitalists have helped many people in terms of going overseas. And if you're interested, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. This is applicable for people with a net worth above $1 million US. That's nomadcapitalist.com/apply. And now back to the show. The other thing I'm curious to get your reaction as a miner, obviously a lot of miners are thinking, like in simple terms, they're thinking about hash price and hash cost, right? But what traditionally happens, every bull cycle, is you kind of, at least historically speaking, what's normally happened is you had the halving, miners bled out a bit, and then after that you sort of saw this crazy bull run, and at that point, the price went up harder than what the network could in terms of catching up. So there's almost this sweet spot to kind of be a miner, right? And in that sweet spot zone, you had people turning on like really old machines, like old S9s and things. So I'm curious, in let's say a world where there's a lot more BitAxe users, maybe in a bull cycle, you kind of see all these people kind of switch on as, lottery miners, let's say, and because, hey, the price is running to the moon. It might be a short-term effect, right? Because that kind of real hype cycle might only go for, let's say, 6 to 9 months. But maybe there'd be like all this hype, and there'd be all these people who are kind of like, oh, I want to get some Bitcoin, or let me get a BitAxe, even if they're not really if they're not strictly speaking profitable, but they're at least kind of relatively in a sweet spot.
There's a couple pools now that have enabled lightning payouts.
Right, like Ocean.
Yeah, Ocean and Brains did. And it was tough before with a small miner because it would take you forever to get to the minimum payout. So I'm seeing people just now tweeting about, I'm getting like several sats a day, which obviously right now isn't worth much, but if Bitcoin does what we all hope it's going to do, maybe that will be worth something. So yeah, I think like you said, exactly, like the hype cycle comes, we're definitely going to see people kind of just ape into BitAxes and plug them in. I think the difference is that they're not going to unplug them because, after that hype cycle, it's not like they're making any less money or it even matters. They're just going to forget to unplug.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a few things here, like, because some people might just depends what you've got plugged in, right? Like, you might kind of be like, oh, I need that plug for something else, I'm going to take that out, or, there is, I would say one thing, there is, as I'm sure you're probably aware, in the tech world, it's known as the 1% fallacy, right? So this kind of idea of like, people come up with a business case, and they say, if I could just be 1% as good as Facebook, or if I could just be 1% of Amazon, I'm going to be a millionaire. Sure. Like this kind of 1%, kind of thinking. So I would be a little cautious on that. But at the same time, I think it's a cool ideological idea, right? Like if you are kind of ideologically believing in Bitcoin as a decentralized thing, and maybe a bit of fun, a bit of a hobbyist kind of thing. And as you said, there seems to be a market demand for this thing. So, you can't really argue with that. So, I certainly want to get all of those people, right, that you just mentioned. Everyone in that category, right? We need to get one. And we're not in that 1% effect that you mentioned, right? It's completely decentralized project, right? So there's not like any one person going after it. So I think there's a lot of different motivations for why people are selling these and why people are buying them. Yeah, totally fair. And yeah, like I said, not like putting the project down or anything here. Like I think it'd be a cool thing.
It's a big task. It's a really big task. Like selling 1 million of these is is doable, but that's big. But like selling, I think Alex Gladstein just tweeted the other day. He's like, let's sell 100 million BitAxes, one in every household. And it's like, I mean, that would be amazing, but that is a very, very big task.
Right. And so in terms of once you started to get to some of those bigger numbers, I guess, as you're saying, you're having to repurpose the existing ASIC, mining rigs that are out there. You're kind of taking it apart, like you said, to take those 320 or however many. And so are there going to be kind of natural thresholds that you hit there? Or, I mean, I guess the other thing I'm thinking about is those, as you said, the legit suppliers, those guys are probably making profit. So there'll be a lot of people who jump into that and be like, hey, I'll buy this one big mining rig machine, split it up into these parts, manufacture BitAxes and sell those. And there's a pretty good profit margin for that. So maybe there's an incentive for people to do it.
It's especially with the new BitAxe, which we call the Supra. The only place to get those chips is actually to buy an S21 and disassemble it. And so all the current sellers of BitAxe Supras are just buying brand new S21s, never plugging it in and unsoldering, I think it's 324 chips out of it, which is wild. It won't be that way forever. They do come on the secondary market eventually.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, how much, like just for, rough numbers, how much does an S21 cost, and then how much does a BitAxe Supra cost, roughly?
I think an S21 right now is like $4,000. Let's see, 4,324. So that means you're getting the chips at $12.34 each, and a BitAxe Supra is going to be between 150 and $200.
Nice, yeah, and of course you got to think about, it's not just like that profit margin. Obviously, you got to think about labor and other parts, and
sure, there's a lot of other parts that go into it.
But I mean, it sounds like a pretty healthy profit margin, and I could imagine like a lot of Bitcoin people might just buy one for fun, right? Like they might, if it's local or if it's not that far, they might just decide, hey, I could just buy one just to play around.
It was really cool. I got to go to Nashville last week and go to Bitcoin Park for their Mining May meetup, which was super awesome. But there's this guy there I'd never met before, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I just bought, I think 25 BitAxes," and he had them in his backpack, and he was just selling them to people for Bitcoin at the meetup, and he sold out. So obviously, this was everyone there was
into mining at a Bitcoin event. But yeah, I mean, hey, why not? Like if you have Bitcoin events near you and there's no one else selling BitAxes, hey, go for it, right? I'm sure you'd probably make some good sales.
Yeah. He was selling them for a great price too, but he was still making money. So I actually want to start in the future pushing that even more. Like people who, want to be the BitAxe dealer at their, at their local meetup. I think that's a great way to get them out there in people's hands. And
for some people, it might even, I mean, look, people come to Bitcoin for their own reasons, right? I was already a libertarian. I was already anti-central banking and all this other stuff. But there might be other people who are more, let's say, engineering, hobby-minded, and they kind of actually get into Bitcoin from that. Like maybe someone sells them a BitAxe and now they become into Bitcoin, right? So there's kind of different ways, people can find it, and it could be just a cool project.
Yeah, I hope it's a good gateway drug for those people, right? Next thing you know, they're just like buying racks of S21s. That'd be great too.
Right. It could be like an onboarding pathway for people. So let's talk a bit about the mining pools aspect. Now, for listeners, you might, if you've seen my recent episode with Steve Lee, we spoke a bit about the mining pool centralization. I would say on Bitcoin X, people like 0xB10C and Mononaut were sort of raising the alarm on this point. Basically, the understanding, as I would say it, there's a bunch of pools that are kind of proxying, to ant pool. And so that does represent a centralization concern. I'm curious if you have any thoughts around that.
I don't like it at all. It shouldn't be centralized like that. I think it's a huge risk for Bitcoin because these big entities are sitting ducks for regulation. They're in some cases publicly traded companies. They're not going to be able to resist or do something else should the regulators come and say, oh, hey, no mining transactions from Stefan anymore. They wouldn't be able to change. So I think there's a big risk there. They have big targets painted on their back. Right now, no problems, or limited problems, I should say, but no guarantee that that's always going to be the case in the future. And mining pools, they choose what transactions get processed, what transactions get allowed. And right now, we're not in a good situation because Foundry, I think, has like 30%, and Antpool and their proxies have, I think, like 40%, something like that. This is the work that Mononaut did, that pie chart that people have seen. But that's a large percentage under a very small number of entities controlling it. So I don't think that's good. That's really, really not good. The whole idea with mining was that people were supposed to be selfish and financially motivated. They would just take the highest paying transactions and include them. And of course, why would they do any funny business, right? Just sort by price and take the highest paying ones because we're miners and, we have electricity bills to pay. But Bitcoin mining has very low margins. It's a tough business. I think any of the big miners will tell you it's a very tough business. And so we've seen things like FPPS, which essentially kind of smooths out your payments. It lowers the variance on your payments. We've seen things like that come into play that just blur the lines a little bit on that just purely profit motivated goal of Bitcoin miners. And so now we have, FPPS pools doing out of band transactions and like kind of funny business with what transactions they include. And I think that's all trying to like eke out a little bit more money from, trying to create some more money for the miners to attract them.
And I'd also just remind listeners, for those who haven't seen my recent episode with Hafa from Swan, he's the CIO of Swan and also the head of Swan Mining. He's pointed out they've been doing some tests on some of the different pools, and it's not what you would necessarily think, right? Like sometimes it's really variable, even around the halving block, the recent halving block, which had a lot of transaction fees. He was saying that some of the payouts were actually very different to what you would expect. And so just because somebody is marketing as FPPS doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get all the payouts that you theoretically should be getting. And so that's kind of another point that, let's say, the industry is sort of discussing and kind of arguing back and forth on that aspect. So we'll see what happens there, but I think the take-home point really is to try just to make sure you're pointing your hash rate, if you're able to a different pool, and ideally a Stratum V2 pool if you can. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the whole Stratum V2 project and where you see that going.
Yes, absolutely. I think we are in this situation where there's not enough pools to choose from, right? Like kind of what I was saying before, like if the miners suspect something going on that they don't like, they should be able to change to a different pool. And this is all centered around what transactions are being included in the block template. So the problem is those pools are going away. So they have less and less options and less ability to actually get a different block template. Stratum V2 is great, right? That on a very high level, that allows you to make your own block template. If you're a big miner, I think that's absolutely fantastic. So you could have some of the benefits of FPPS or some of the other strategies where you have this lower variance. But if the pool doesn't care, you can make your own templates. You can include whatever damn transactions you want, which is definitely in the Bitcoin ethos. I think that's huge. Everyone should switch to that if they can. I kind of wonder, would or could Antpool even realistically support Stratum V2 and letting their clients make their own block templates, right? Like they run their own transaction accelerator. So how are they going to get those blocks in? But I think it's an excellent development. I'm excited to see Spiral, providing grants to people. I've been in talks with Blue Matt and PlebHash and some of the other people working on SV2 to get it working with the BitAxe. In fact, there was a demonstration at BitDevs in Nashville where I just was, where a guy named Brian had got a proxy set up, SV2 proxy, and had his BitAxe pointed at it. And he was showing it right there at the BitDevs, which was super cool. But it can totally work. I think there's still a lot of complexity associated with actually running Stratum V2, right? Like if you're just a miner at home, you have to have a node that is creating those, I forget the technical word for it, but this creating those transactions for you. And so that's an additional software concept that you have to set up. And if you're a home miner and you have a node, you could actually just solo mine to that node on your own with Stratum V1, and you'd be making your own transactions as well. So it's not super useful in that case. But yeah, if you want to be a home miner and you have the technical ability to set up a node and set up your SV2 proxy and you want to pool mine, yeah, Stratum V2 is great for that.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe another area where hopefully if the industry cares enough about it, they might sort of make a bit of noise at the manufacturers and try to get them to support SV2 with their firmware and at device to sort of have the right setup for that. But I know there are people in the industry who see it like maybe they're not as jazzed or excited about SV2 as, let's say, other people are. And so, you know, there might be a little bit of resistance there. But and to be clear, it's not a silver bullet. Again, it's more like it helps, but it's not, you know, at the end of the day, the pool can still reject that and say, no, I don't accept your proposed block. But I think the idea, or at least the idea I've heard from Matt Corallo, is this idea that if the pool rejects your block, then now you know you need to switch pools, right? So at least there's kind of that element.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk lately about empty blocks, and some of the guys from CK Pool, which is a solo mining pool, and Ocean talking about this, like why empty blocks happen. And it all comes down to this delay when a new block comes out and the pool broadcasts out the sort of first work for the miner to work on. And I was having a discussion with another BitAxe developer about this, but does having to negotiate your block template with the pool just add additional latency here? That seems like it's going to make this problem even worse. So I think there's still some things to be
ironed out, maybe.
Figured out there.
But I also know there's kind of other benefits too. Like it has encryption, so that you're less likely to get hash rate hijacked. So it's kind of like you might make that trade off of like, yeah, I don't want to get stolen from, so effectively stolen from the hash rate.
Yeah, and it has a binary file format. Right now we use just ASCII. Stratum is all in ASCII, so there's a lot of overhead associated with that. So this could be useful for small miners that have limited processing power on board to deal with that, or maybe not over the best internet connections, having to do with that lower total bandwidth.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, bottom line, I mean, you can still point to an independent pool, right? Even if they don't have SV2, at least if they're independent and they're not doing this proxy business, then at least that's something. Or if you point to Ocean and you choose the template that choose your whatever template you're interested in, then that's at least better, right? So
yeah, I think we need a lot more pools. We need a lot more pools. I think there wasn't a lot of push in that industry to get more pool software out there. CK Pool has had an open source solo mining pool available forever, like 10 years or so, but I think it was kind of fell behind in development and wasn't super popular. I know FutureBit has revitalized that and has that available on their miners, but just recently, one of the core BitAxe developers launched Public Pool, which is a solo mining pool, but it's actually very easy to self-host. It's a single-click install on Umbrel, so you can just install Umbro, which is probably one of the easier nodes to install, and then single click installing your own solo mining pool, and then build your BitAxe and point it at it, and now you're sort of top to bottom self-sovereign miner.
Oh, that's cool.
So I want to see like a lot more projects in that vein, so that like anyone who has an even smallest remote interest in mining, with an independent pool, can just make it happen without too much stress.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great spot to finish up here. Just listeners, make sure you check out bitaxe.org. All the links are in the show notes as always. And Scott, thank you for joining me, and keep up the great work out there.
Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it out there with your family and friends. Check out my website at stefanlivera.com, and I will see you in the Citadels.